What's up, everybody? I want to talk to you today about buying land to build your assisted living mansion, right? Whether it's one mansion or a neighborhood of these, I want to talk about potentially buying land that don't have all the right utilities. Because a lot of times, man, when you're looking at land and it's right there in the heart of the city and it's an acre or 2 acres and it's got utilities at the street and it's commercial zoned, it has all the things, dude, it's crazy expensive, right? It might be $1, $2+ million for some of these things. And that's how it is in my city, right? If I was next to all the big smelly facilities on the major thoroughfare with, C1 zone land and all that kind of stuff, it's probably $2 to $3 million for one of these lots. But I went and bought land that was $625,000, right? It was 7.6 acres. And so I wanted to share some of the insights that you can have some practical takeaways really to expand, hopefully to double or quadruple the amount of options that you have as you're looking at land. Because there's a lot of limiting factors. One of them, as I mentioned, right, is zoning. So a lot of times, if you are boxed in and the city says, hey, you know what, you're doing assisted living, it's commercial zoning, man, that's 2 to 4x the price of the same exact piece of land if it was, residentially zoned, right? I bought agriculture land, not on the major thoroughfare, about 3.5 miles away from the city center, right? And it was in the path of progress and substantially cheaper, but I was able to buy this land and go through a special use permit, jump through some hoops with the city, and have my agricultural zoned land be good for my assisted living mansion neighborhood. Now, the drawback here is kind of pros and cons, right? I was able to buy land substantially cheaper than a lot of the other options that are zoned properly for this, but my drawback was utilities. I bought land without some of the utilities. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes talking through really the 4 different categories of utilities. Sometimes it's a big deal, sometimes it's not a big deal. And my hope is that you can learn some of these lessons and be able to say, hey, you know what, here's so many more options. If I just ask these questions to the city and I figured out some of this utility stuff here, you know what, now I have twice as many options and it's half the price, right? Like, let's talk through some of these things. We're gonna start with the most important, which is water. So if you're looking at a piece of land and it doesn't have public water right there, right, and it's too far away for you to bring the water to you, then your next option is digging a well. Can you dig a well, right? Is there actual water there? That's really the first thing we need to find out. And I would recommend starting by talking to some well engineers, well designers. They're the people who are gonna design the whole system here. And for you to find them, at least in my experience, I've found some well digging companies, right? The people who go and dig the wells, and then I ask them, hey, who is a reputable person in my area that knows all about the stuff that I can talk to about planning to see if I should and can have a well on this piece of property. And so really there's all sorts of different reports that are available that they, as the engineer, designer person, can pull these things up. And there's all this data of, hey, here's all the wells that are around you, and it'll show the quality of the water, the quantity of the water, right? Like, you don't want to go into buying a piece of land thinking, oh yeah, I'm just going to put a well there and not have enough water down below, right? It might be like all gone. They might have done wells 20 years ago and it's just a drought and there's not a lot of water there. So my land that I bought did not have water. It was over a mile away to bring in city water. And that was just a crazy number that was quoted, like close to $1 million to do something like that. And so I dug my well, and it happened to be over the aquifer, which was another kind of a big old set of hoops to jump through because of again, I have this big body of water, kind of a lake underneath my property, which is great. So much water there. But I was able to pull up reports of my neighbor, a couple other properties nearby. Here's when they did their well. Here's how far they went down before they hit water. Here's the quality of all their tests and all that kind of stuff. If you ask the right people, there's a lot of great resources that you can do. The next real big question here is, can I have a residential well or a commercial well? And they may not call them a commercial well in your area, but I think it's the easiest way for me to communicate my point. So a residential well, no big deal. Very little hoops to jump through, right? You dig a hole, you put the pipes down it, you can have your pump do all those things, and it's not a big deal. For me to have what we call here in Texas a PWS well, a commercial well, it's a much bigger deal. There's all these different things to consider. So I think that's an important thing. Don't just think, oh, well, you know what? There's water down there. I know there is. I'm good. I can buy this piece of land. There's a lot of other things to consider. For example, setbacks from pollutants, right? They don't want pollutants right at your wellhead. So it might be a gas station. Honestly, the most common is a septic field. They want to make sure there's no drip lines from a septic field within an area near your wellhead, right? So if you have to put in a well and septic, a lot of times that could be a deal killer because both of them won't fit. For me, specifically, I had to have a 150-foot setback on all sides of the wellhead. And because my property was not 300 feet wide, that means even though I put my well in the center, I had to go and get easements from my neighbors in order to do this. And they had to sign something stating they will not put pollutants, septic fields in that area. So there is definitely some variables there. I also had to be a certain distance away from my neighbor's well. So now I needed to go research, where are my neighbor's wells at? And there's differences for, commercial wells versus residential wells. In my experience here, it was 100 feet for a residential well I still had to be set back off of, and 150 feet for the commercial stuff. And sometimes that just might be a piece of property that doesn't fit. It's too skinny, it's too, triangular shaped, and you can't fit your wellhead anywhere and keep that radius on your own property. So let's talk costs of these wells. For me, my whole well project cost me about $120,000. And that's a lot more than I thought it was gonna cost. The well itself, drilling down and putting a pump down the hole, that was about 20 grand. Not a crazy number. That's kind of the price for, residential well as well. It was everything else that had to go into it, and I had to follow this strict code on all these different things. So I had to build my well house, right? That was a decent chunk of money there. Then I had to put all these crazy tanks in it. Those tanks were super expensive. Then I had to put these crazy pumps in it, also crazy expensive. And then I had to have a backup generator for this. And the pumps that were spec'd for me were 3-phase, right? So I had to now have a 3-phase generator. That was not cheap. And so all of the little things that went along with this ended up being $100,000 extra, right, on top of the well. So when my designer was like, oh yeah, this is, 100, 150,000, I'm like, there's no way, right? I've got a quote from this guy. It's 20 grand to put the well down the hole. And I'm like, okay. And he must be BSing me. But learn from my mistake, right? It really did cost 120 grand to me, not for the well, but for all the accessories that are in the code. And I'm in Texas, and you may have a different code, but just put some extra money in there because, again, this could be what it is for you. A residential well, in my experience, has very little hoops to jump through. You can kind of do what you want. You don't have to have all the fancy pumps and tanks and everything that's required for a commercial type well. So for me here in Texas, it is any time you service more than 24 people. So if you have 25 and those are your customers and you provide drinking water to them, now you are considered a public water supply. And now you have to jump through these hoops. So technically I could build one 16-bed mansion here in Texas and still do a residential well. Some of our partners have done that, but if you're gonna build a neighborhood of them like I have, right, then you have to do the commercial well. So check those things. The second thing that's really important to consider, it's still along the lines of water, but it's not potable water, it's fire water. It is where is the water gonna come from for a fire truck to put out a fire? And a lot of times that is a huge cost. So really important during your due diligence process. Speaking of, if you wanna see the list of questions that I asked the fire marshal and all my due diligence questions, it is in the free resources. We have built out an elaborate free resources page on our website, assistedlivingmansion.com. Make sure you download that. It will save you hundreds of thousands. I've lost hundreds of thousands figuring this out myself. So really important, as you're asking the fire marshal, what type of tank, pump, fire hydrants do I need, right? And sometimes if you're in an area where there is no city water, therefore there's no city fire hydrants, right? And do you have to provide your own fire hydrants? I had to put in 3 private fire hydrants and have a 6-inch pipe under them that led to a big 70,000 gallon tank, and it had a massive 3-phase pump on it. That whole situation there cost me between 250 and 300 grand to do all of that kind of stuff. But I had the book thrown at me. My fire marshal was aggressive, and some of our partners, super chill, right? So it really depends what type of fire sprinklers are you putting in, commercial versus residential, full 13 versus D or R, how many gallons per minute they want out of a fire hydrant. Sometimes you can just use your actual tank and they can hook directly up to that tank and they can use that, right? certain questions of how many gallons per minute they want flowing from this fire hydrant, and that determines how big of a pump. I had to have this massive pump, I had to have this huge pump building, and all the different things, and it was way more than I thought it was gonna be. So a lot of pros and cons. This is something you can do, but you definitely got to dig into this and do a lot of research on it before you make an offer and buy a piece of property without knowing what all these things will cost. So septic's the next one. That's a really big and common one, right? And in my personal experience, I don't think septic's that big of a deal. But there are some really important hurdles you have to jump through and figure out if you can do this. I have had septic at Mesa for 5 years. We have septic on all our mansions at the new neighborhood that we're building out. And it really goes back to, does this septic fit? I think that's a really important thing, because a lot of times you may need a way bigger area than you think it is. And it really goes back to your soils test. So you start during your investigation, hire an engineer. There's a designer who, that's their job, is they do this kind of stuff. They'll, it's like $400. They'll have someone come out, dig a couple of test holes. They'll test the soil and say, okay, here's what you got. It's, class 1 through 4 soil. And based on that, your absorption rate is X, right? And then they put the whole thing in the calculator here and they say, okay, this is how many beds you're gonna have. Here's the formula. You need this many square feet of drip field. So it can be a ton of drip field, or it can be a moderate amount. It could fill up a backyard. It could fill up an acre or two of drip field, really depending on your soil types. And so sometimes I've had multiple properties where I've had like 3 or 4 inches of great soil, and then underneath that, solid bedrock. Like there's nothing there. Like that's not a good option. Or I've had no bedrock and it's just 20 feet deep of black and brown clay, and it absorbs terribly. Another really bad soil type. So if you have bad soil, right, and I would have never thought to investigate this before I went through the school hard knocks, it can drastically affect your deal, and it can drastically affect, can you realistically fit a septic field on your piece of property? And then if you have to couple that with, you're gonna put a well, and you have to have 100 or 150 feet setback from this, it might just be not possible at all. You might have a 2-3 acre piece of property and it's still not possible. So really important considerations on this. 4 cost considerations. My septic is a commercial septic. It's massive. I have 3 massive tanks and huge drip fields and all that kind of stuff. It's way overbuilt by like 3 or 4x, but that's what they wanted. That cost me about $70,000. So it may be higher for you, it may be lower for you, but that is a nice budgetary item you could put in. So the next utility is power. And I would say you have to have power. I don't think you can run these mansions off the grid on like a solar farm or anything like that. Maybe we'll get there in 20 years, but right now I would say if you're gonna buy land, make sure you have power. But it is a question of what type of service do you have? Do you have single phase power there? Do you have 3-phase? What is the amount of power that's coming to your property? And do you need to upgrade the transformer? All the different things. So this is important to find out, again, before you buy your property, but as you are talking to your MEP engineer, right? The person who is building out all of the electrical requirements that's coming in. What type of power supply do you have so that you can design your building, all your electrical requirements based on that, right? If you don't have 3-phase power available to you, then a lot of times some of the appliances and pumps and HVACs and things like that, water heaters, a lot of times the best ones are 3-phase. So you need to make sure that your engineer knows what kind of power you have coming to you so they can design these things appropriately. Now for the lot that I bought, I had single-phase power to my whole property, but there was 3-phase power at the street, and 3-phase power, you get much more power from there, and it can run bigger things, right? It can run my pump, and I needed that for my fire pump. It could only be a 3-phase pump or diesel, which was way expensive. So I had to spend about $55,000. I had to drop 5 or 6 poles coming back down the property, and they brought 3-phase to it, and then they dropped down that and did a 3-phase transformer that was able to come to me and give me the power that I needed for my big old pumps. That was about 55 grand. I think it was about 3 or 4 grand per pole as an average, and then the transformer was somewhere around 30 grand or something to that effect. So some more budgetary items for you to consider. Hopefully you don't have to upgrade your power, but I had to upgrade my transformers on both my properties, including the Mesa one, which was a home conversion. So the last utility I want to talk about is the internet. And I think a lot of times people just overlook it. They just assume, yeah, I have internet there. But what kind of internet do you have? I can tell you so important that you have fast internet. Our operations company, it is all running on internet. All of our medications that we're passed multiple times a day, we're on the EMR, on the iPad, and if you have slow internet, it's just like pulling teeth trying to get your med techs to give meds in a timely fashion. It's horrible if you have slow internet. You need fast internet. We use it for all our Wi-Fi TVs. We use internet, it's so important. So for our property, we happen to have residential internet there on the power poles, and it was like an older coax, and it's probably 20 years old. And best case scenario, you're getting 150 gigabytes, but you share that with the whole neighborhood. So at a busy time when everyone's home from work and streaming and doing all the different things, your internet goes down. And when everyone's off their Wi-Fi, then it goes back up, right? And I didn't want to have that. So there was another option. I brought in what we'll call commercial internet, and it may not be, but we brought in what they call a home run. So it's one direct fiber cable from their repeater going directly to my building. So I literally have 1 gig of internet that I'm sharing with no one. It is all mine. It never goes down. My upload speeds are crazy. It is substantially more expensive, but I thought it was super important because, again, I'm going to be sharing this for my whole neighborhood. So I'm able to come and split that off, and I still get 1 gig to my whole neighborhood, and it never gets affected by the ebbs and flows of people coming home and getting on their Wi-Fi based TV. So if you want to do something like that and consider that for your project, start early. It's not an afterthought. It took at least 6 months to go through this process. The cable company, they had to submit permits and all the different things and bring it like a mile, I think, down the road and then into my property. And so for cost averages for you guys, I think it was like 15 or 17 grand that I was quoted. But then I found a second company who had another service, the other direction. And they said, hey, you know what, Brett? We'll do it for you. I see this quote over here. We'll do it for free, and we'll just have a 7-year contract instead of a 5. So then I sent it back to the other guys and essentially got them negotiating into each other. And it cost me nothing to bring in a dedicated fiber line to myself. I do have a 5 or 6-year contract on that. But man, it is amazing, lightning fast internet, crazy speeds, and it doesn't fluctuate when everyone's home. So those are the important things for you to consider. My hope is that you can take this information, process through it. You might need to listen to it twice, but go through and start looking at some other land that may be a little bit further out from the expensive stuff, right? If you're finding stuff that's commercial zone, it's $1 million, man, there are plenty of properties that I look at around the country with our partners that are $300,000 to $500,000, and they're 5 to 10 acres, right? And they're just a few minutes outside of the hustle and bustle. You may have to put in some of these utilities, and sometimes they can be a deal killer. Sometimes it's like, hey man, that's gonna be crazy expensive, or I can't even do it. But sometimes, depending on your fire marshal and your situation, it's no big deal. You can still put in the tank and pump, and you have a residential fire suppression system, and it's like, oh yeah, that was like 50 grand, no big deal. So just because I had the book thrown at me and I told you all these crazy high numbers, I really did have really high numbers, but that was more of the exception and probably less of the rule.